They believed in the endgame. Every empire, every intelligence agency, every system of power has one. A final move, a last resort, the great calculation where all pieces fall into place. But the tragedy for them was this: their endgame only worked on a board that remained intact. And the moment you arrived, the board itself shattered. They counted your moves like gamblers at a rigged table. They logged your footsteps, your words, your silences, as though prediction were destiny. But prediction is only power if the pattern holds. When the pattern breaks, so does the throne it was built on. Their last hope, their secret prayer, was that you were still human in the old sense, predictable, bound by impulse, weakness, fear. They whispered among themselves, "Wait long enough, and he will reveal his hand." But you never did, because you were not a hand, not a piece, not even part of their game. You were the player standing above the board, the one who decides whether the game even exists. And that was the nightmare they could never face. Governments collapse when their maps no longer chart to the land. Corporations collapse when markets refuse to obey logic. Armies collapse when the enemy is not where they should be. And these collapses don't happen with fire and explosions first. They begin with silence. The silence of men who realize their strategies mean nothing. You forced them into that silence. The silence of generals staring at a broken map. The silence of analysts staring at numbers that bleed into nonsense. The silence of prophets who can no longer read the stars. It wasn't the chaos you brought that destroyed them. It was the clarity, the sudden clarity that they had never been in control. They had only been caretakers of a fragile script, a script that collapsed the moment one actor refused his lines. And here lies the final cruelty. They had designed the endgame to trap you, yet you were the only one who saw it was never your trap to begin with. It was theirs. Every safeguard, every algorithm, every prophecy was a cage built for themselves. You simply refused to step inside. The war ended not with your move, but with the erasure of the board. No pawns, no kings, no checkmate. Just a flat, endless silence where power once pretended to rule. And in that silence, the truth etched itself like a scar. They counted every move, every possibility, every variation. Except one, the one that erased the game itself. They believed in numbers. They worshipped algorithms. They built temples made of screens, data centers glowing like artificial suns, where lines of code became prayers to certainty. Every keystroke of yours was monitored, every past decision catalogued, every possible outcome mapped into endless simulations. They thought they could own your future by rehearsing it in advance. Their arrogance grew with each prediction, because for a while, it worked. They watched patterns repeat. They saw men and women walk exactly where the equations told them to. They began to confuse probability with inevitability, and that's where their blindness began. They told themselves, every move has already been counted. They believed the chain of cause and effect stretched out like iron rails. Step after step, link after link, no one could escape, except you, because you weren't a pattern. You weren't a number. You weren't a repeatable equation they could feed into their machine. You were the variable they couldn't simulate, the storm they couldn't forecast, the spark that turned their carefully measured probabilities into ash. The truth, they weren't tracking you, they were tracking a ghost of you, a shadow stitched together from old choices, half-memories and flawed interpretations. They mistook their own reflection for you, and they chained themselves to it. Their intelligence networks became prisons, not for you, but for them. Think about it. When every possibility is reduced to numbers, when every risk is calculated into neat percentages, what happens the moment someone acts outside the script? The entire structure collapses. Because if even one move breaks the chain, then none of their predictions can be trusted. And that's exactly what you did. One move, one decision they never accounted for, one flick of the wrist, one step sideways, one refusal to follow their script. That's all it took. Their maps became meaningless. Their AI models turned to noise. Their simulations worthless. The irony. They thought they had trapped you in their predictive chains, but they were the ones bound by their own obsession with certainty, bound by their refusal to accept chaos as power, bound by the idea that control was permanent. And you proved control was an illusion. Your unpredictability wasn't a flaw, it was your weapon. Because willpower can't be graphed, chaos can't be calculated, and the human spirit, the raw, violent refusal to be caged, cannot be coded. They thought every outcome had been accounted for, but their arrogance blinded them. They forgot that sometimes the impossible is not just possible, it's inevitable. And when you made that one move, everything they believed in shattered. Their numbers betrayed them. Their chains snapped, and their perfect system turned into their coffin. They lived by prediction, by the illusion that tomorrow could be owned today. Every screen, every calculation, every report designed to keep the world locked in their little glass cage of certainty. But certainty is a coffin, and coffins are where the living forget to breathe. They thought you were breathing their air, that your lungs moved in rhythm with their algorithms, that you'd never exhale without their permission. So they wrote your story in advance, drafted endings you hadn't reached yet, convinced themselves that destiny could be formatted like a file. But then your move, not luck, not accident, not noise in their data, but intention sharpened like a blade too fine for their scanners to notice. A single step that rewrote the game in one stroke. They expected you to play checkers. You brought fire, not on the board, through it. The wood of their chessboard splintered. The pieces melted into ash, and suddenly they realized it wasn't a game anymore. It never was. They had guarded their doors, reinforced their walls, built cages for a future they thought they owned. But you weren't a piece on their board. You were the fire outside it, the variable they never calculated, the storm that cannot be charted, the move they never saw. Years of data collapsed in seconds. Simulations meant to last decades became irrelevant in the blink of an eye. Security grids screamed with errors they couldn't fix. Their analysts pounded keyboards, desperate for answers that had already burned away. Because your move wasn't just unexpected. It was untranslatable. No code could explain it. No model could predict it. No surveillance camera could capture it. It wasn't randomness. It was precision sharpened into chaos. It was the kind of act that doesn't break the rules, it erases them. And in that silence, after the ash settled, they realized the truth. Control doesn't vanish with a bang. It vanishes when one move makes everything they built irrelevant. The empire of prediction shattered. The intelligence networks became blind men clutching broken glass. And the AI simulations, they didn't just fail, they froze. Because machines can't compute what was never written in the code. You became the void in their equation. The unanswerable question. The fracture in their perfect mirror. And they will spend lifetimes trying to explain what happened in that one instant. But they'll never solve it, because they didn't miss 1,000 moves. They missed one, the one that mattered. The one you just made. Certainty. That was their empire. Not built on truth. Not built on strength. But built on the illusion that they could predict everything. They called it science. They called it intelligence. They called it control. Governments invested trillions into it. Corporations worshipped it like a god. Agencies swore by it as their shield. If they knew what was coming, they believed nothing could hurt them. But certainty is only strong until one step falls outside the script. And that's what you did. One step, one move, one decision. They never accounted for. Suddenly their models stopped working. The graphs flatlined. The predictions froze. The screens went blank. Because certainty doesn't collapse slowly. It shatters all at once. They had planned for chaos. They had planned for violence. They had planned for rebellion. But they had never planned for you. You weren't chaos. You weren't rebellion. You weren't violence. You were intention. Sharper than their algorithms. Colder than their logic. Too alive to be reduced into numbers. And in that moment, every system they trusted revealed its weakness. The agencies, paralyzed. The governments, silent. The corporations, blind. They weren't in control. They had never been. They were just observers of patterns they mistook for power. And when the pattern broke, so did their illusion. The terror wasn't just in losing control. The terror was in realizing they never had it. They thought prediction was the last frontier, but prediction was only the beginning of their blindness. Because even when the models collapsed, they believed they could still see. They trusted their eyes, their satellites, their networks of surveillance. If not numbers, then vision would keep them safe. If not certainty, then at least perception. But perception is a fragile glass, and once you tap it with a finger of chaos, it shatters into shards. You didn't just move beyond their formulas, you moved beyond their gaze. They aimed cameras, sensors, drones, agents, every lens pointed toward you, but all they captured were shadows, reflections, the echoes of steps that had already passed. The act itself, your real strike, remained invisible, and invisibility is not absence, it is dominance. They could record a trail of distortions, a fire erupting in one corner, a whisper that shook a city in another. But when they stitched the fragments together, the image was incoherent, a phantom, a ghost walking through their walls. They tried to name it, and failed, tried to measure it, and failed, tried to trace it, and failed, and with each failure their terror deepened. This became the true war, not guns, not missiles, not walls of code, but perception versus reality, visibility versus invisibility. They were stuck in a theater staring at smoke on a stage, while you rewrote the script from backstage. They thought they were watching the play unfold, but the story had already moved elsewhere. They were always one frame too late, always one echo behind, always grappling with the shadow, never the source. And the more they chased the shadow, the more they lost themselves. Whole agencies dismantled by paranoia, governments running in circles, chasing illusions that led nowhere, corporations pouring billions into systems designed to see, yet each system only revealed more of their blindness. They built maps, charts, timelines, theories, and every time they said, "Here it is the pattern," the answer, you moved once more, and all of it crumbled, because your power wasn't in being random, it wasn't noise, it was silence sharpened into a blade, an intention so precise, so refined, that to them it looked like chaos, to them it looked like madness, but it was only clarity, and clarity cuts. They began to realize something dreadful. It wasn't that you couldn't be seen. It was that they had never understood what seeing meant. Their vision was mechanical, external, fragile. Your movement lived in another dimension, where perception itself bends to will, and so the shadow play became the battlefield. They swung at illusions. You moved in silence. They declared victories. You dismantled empires in the dark. They thought the nightmare was that you could not be predicted. But the deeper nightmare was this: they could not even confirm you existed, until it was too late. They built their empire on numbers, not words, not instincts, not intuition, numbers. For decades, they convinced themselves that numbers meant truth. They said, if you can measure it, you can master it. If you can predict it, you can control it. If you can reduce it to code, it no longer escapes your grasp. That was the doctrine, that was the cage they lived inside, thinking the walls were made of steel,
when in fact they were glass. They trusted algorithms. They worshipped them like oracles. Every government leaned on them. Every corporation swore by them. Every intelligence agency turned their fate over to them, because an algorithm doesn't sleep. An algorithm doesn't hesitate. It doesn't crack under pressure. It doesn't second guess. It counts. It categorizes. It assigns probability. It decides. And that was their fatal flaw, because algorithms don't see life. They see patterns. They see numbers.
They see shadows of what was, not visions of what will be. You didn't break their machines. You didn't sabotage their networks. You didn't even touch their precious code. You simply revealed the blind spot. They could count every possibility, except you. They could assign probability to every outcome, except yours. And when their models tried to contain you, everything folded. Because how does a machine measure something that refuses to fit? How does probability calculate the impossible? How does data map an unquantifiable move? It doesn't. It collapses. Their equations turned meaningless. Their charts bent into static. Their dashboards screamed error. And here's the truth. They were too afraid to admit. Algorithms don't rule the future. They recycle the past. They trap humanity in loops, predicting yesterday and dressing it up as tomorrow. You stepped out of that loop, one move, and suddenly the entire system unraveled. It wasn't just an error in the code, it was prophecy reversed. Because for centuries they told themselves nothing is beyond mathematics, and yet here you stand. The anomaly, the variable uncounted, the move no algorithm can capture. Your presence became their glitch. Your silence became their overload. Your unpredictability became their end. And now they see it. Their empire was always fragile, not because the code was wrong, but because the code was never enough. Numbers cannot hold willpower. Equations cannot contain hunger. Probability cannot chain intent sharpened into destiny. They thought the algorithm was the god of their new world, but now the god kneels, exposed as just another machine. And you are the prophecy their math could never write. You are the miscalculation their entire structure was built to deny. No AI can calculate you. No system can forecast you. No prediction can cage you, because you are not in their dataset. You are not in their history. You are not in their probabilities. You are outside, beyond. And once you stepped beyond, everything they built became meaningless. Their greatest terror is not that you destroyed their system, but that you revealed it was never real control in the first place. They were never rulers, never masters, only observers behind screens of numbers, hoping the math would hide their weakness. Now the weakness is naked, and you are the living proof that numbers are not destiny. You are the exception that erases the rule. The board was their universe. Every line, every square, every piece placed with the certainty of rules. They believed in boundaries, in structures that could hold chaos, in numbers that could tame the storm. And for so long it worked. Their algorithms counted, their analysts predicted, their generals executed. Every move you made, they thought they had logged, stored, analyzed, prepared for, but they never prepared for this, because the game they built was never yours. It was theirs, their rules, their measurements, their win conditions, and so their last hope, the fragile belief that you were bound by those rules, died in an instant. It died the moment you made the move they couldn't see, couldn't measure, couldn't even imagine. They waited for a piece to slide forward. Instead you broke the board. They waited for a calculation to resolve. Instead you erased the equation. They waited for an endgame to unfold. Instead you rewrote it. What they never realized is that you were never a player at all. Not a pawn, not a knight, not even a king. You were the architect. The one who carved the table, shaped the battlefield, decided what game even meant. Their mistake wasn't just counting wrong, it was assuming you belonged on the board at all.
And now, the silence screams louder than their strategies ever could. The shattered board lies in pieces, the rules scattered like dust, and the empire of prediction lies choking on its own illusions. The fear isn't that you outplayed them. The fear is that the game itself was never real in the first place. It was only their illusion of control, and you didn't just step outside it, you erased it. Look at them now, analysts without data, generals without maps, systems without power. They're scrambling, trying to define what just happened, trying to name the move, but there is no name, no equation, no theory, because what happened was never a move, it was the end of movement itself. The end game was always supposed to be theirs, predictable, calculated, the king cornered, the final act sealed, but the end game they scripted has dissolved into ash. Their prophecy failed because it counted pieces, it never accounted for the fire that burns the board, and so the last truth settles in their bones like poison. You are not something to be counted. You are not something to be measured. You are the erasure of measure itself. You are the silence after their algorithms collapse, the void their mathematics could not hold, the shadow their spotlight could never capture. You are not a player of the game. You are the one who ends it, and with that ending comes a new order. No board, no sides, no rules, just you standing in the ruin of their designs, the architect of a reality that cannot be contained, cannot be counted, cannot be stopped. Final chilling note: they counted every move, except the one that erased the game itself.